And now I will share the daf. Okay, let's get this all set up over here. I will bring it down here. This over here. They all set up. Okay, gewaltig.
We're in Victoria Lake.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Beautiful. And you have reception. That's a good thing.
we're on Elon Musk.
Oh, on what's it called again? He has a Starlink. Oh, wow,
Starlink, yeah.
beautiful. See, so we learned in the Gemara Sanhedrin that the Goyim are going to say we made everything for the Eden for the entire, and Hashem going to tell them nonsense. You made it for yourself. But Elon can say, I made Starlink as Eden can learn wherever they are.
That's right.
Okay, so we're right at the top of Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, and what we learned was we're learning about the prohibition of Bishul Akum. And the Gemara tells us that even though there's psukim that the Gemara quoted, but it's really only midrabanan, it's a gzer midrabanan. Why Bishul Akum is usher? The psukim are only an asmachta, but it's really derabanan, and we need to know why it's derabanan. So Rashi says something very interesting. Shelo Yehe Yisrael rogel esle b'machal of a mishnah. A yid shouldn't eat by a goy because the concern is v'yachilenu davar tamei. If he eats by a guy kosher food, the guy might slip in some tray for food. However, Rashi on the Mishnah does not say that. And Tosfos points out, Pirush Rashi, the Rabbanon gozer mishum dechayish shema yachilenu devarim tameim. But the Yoser Hayonira, I think a better pshat of Tosfos would be lefarish hatam mishum chasnus. If you eat with a guy and you party with a guy, it could lead to a relationship that could lead to a marriage, and that's what the Chazal are trying to stop. The Chen Pirsha Kunchish B'Masnisim, and Lamaisa that the Rashi says in the Mishnah as well is the reason for the prohibition of Bishul. Omer Avram Bar David. The Ravid says, Menachem, your friend Eli Grossman came to say Mazel Tov. Now he's in Victoria Lake, so he said Mazel Tov to you, and also Mr. Nussbaum told me that the new division head is Nussbaum, is their son. So it'll be Geschmack. It'll be a Geschmack organized year. Okay, Gewaltig. Oh, you knew already. Okay, Gewaltig. I thought I told you a Chiddush. I thought I had information off the press. Anyway, Omer HaRav Bar David. The Vadai Shalokais Osru Chachamim Kishaovid Kachavim Mavashlim Bevesa. Bishul Akum is only author if the goy cooks in his own house. Abol Kishumavaso Bevesa Shal Yisrael. But a goy who's cooking in a Yid's house, Ein Lochush, there's no problem of Bishul Akum, Lo Lechasnus, V'loi L'Shemi Achilenu Dvurim Tameim. Big Chiddush, V'loi Hoydelo Rebbeinu Tam. Rebbeinu Tam says that's not true. The Vadai Kivan Sha'ovid Kechav Mevashel, Lo Chalku Klal Chachamim Ben Yeshus HaYisrael Lo Yeshus Ovid Kechav. According to the Ravid, if a Jewish restaurant hires a guy to cook, they don't need a mishgiach to turn on the flame because Bishul Akum only applies in the house of a guy, not in the house of a yid. Zokt Rebbeinu Tam, absolutely not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's in the house of the yid. It doesn't matter. If it's Bishul Akum, it's also regardless. We're afraid that the guy won't be careful in the Beis Yisrael. So I was just thinking, one of the biggest problems that we run into with Bishul Akum is people who have caregivers for older parents who aren't able to take care of themselves. Those caregivers are goyim. There's no doubt that they're cooking. And there's a big tumult about it because there's a question of Bishul Akum. However, I'm not a posik. I'm just saying that according to the Ravid, it wouldn't be a problem. I wonder if poskim use the Ravid as a sniff lahater if there's other issues. But one thing we know for sure that there are Rishonim, the Ravid, even though the Rebbeinu Tam argues vehemently on them, nevertheless, because the Rebbeinu Tam says for the Rebbeinu Tam devadai, like the Rebbeinu Tam is pretty strong about the fact that it's a problem of Bishul Akum, even if it's in the house and the premises of the Yid, but Lamaisa the Ravid is matter, and he holds there's no issue of bishul akum in such a case. Now, there's some very subtle differences in cases where they are kosher, where they're not kosher, because it's all the Rabbanon, it's all what type of hecker is required, so that the Rabbanon's assessment is that there is no longer a concern of chasnas. Okay, beautiful. Let's see the Gemara right. Anything that can be eaten raw, like a carrot or an apple, even if a guy cooks it for you, a guy cooks a compote, there's no problem of bishul akum because an apple can be eaten raw, a carrot can be eaten raw. This is how they said it in Surah, that something that can be eaten raw, there will not be a problem of bishul akum. But Pumbedisa Masnahachi, they had a different rule. And they said, Amar Rab Shmuel Bar Rav Yitzchak Amar Rav, Kol she'ene nechel al shulchan molachim, l'lavas boyes apas, ein boy mishum bishule avoid kachafim. Something that is not fit for a king, that you wouldn't put on a king's table, there's no problem of bishul akum. So, for instance, we eat potato chips with a hechsher, but it's not bishul Yisrael, it's bishul akum. The heter why we're allowed to eat potato chips made by goyim with a hechsher is because it's not Eilah Shulchan Malachim. You're not going to see the king and queen have on their table potato chips. You're not going to have the president, maybe cheeseburgers, but potato chips you don't normally see on the place of malchus. And therefore, there's not a problem of bishul. What's the difference between these two shitas? If something that could be eaten raw or something that is Eilah Shulchan Malachim. So zogt the Gemara. A couple of examples. My benayu, ikabenayu dogim ketanim, small fish. The ardi, and ardi is something called bullets. I don't know exactly what that is. The dice and porridge. These are three things that cannot be eaten raw. So according to the first shot, they cannot be eaten raw. There'll be a problem with bishul akum. But they're also not Eilah Shulchan Malachim. You wouldn't find these foods on the king's table, and therefore it would be mutter to eat according to the second side. Tosfos speaks out something very important, that although there's a halukah deis as to what the rule is, halacha l'maisa, we paskin that any one of these will say that it's not bishul akum. So we're mekel according to both tzaddim. And I want to bring your attention to Tosfos inside, and I'm going to point out to the Tosfos. Let's see if I could find it. Let's see if I could find where to find the part of Tosfos that I'm looking for. Oh, here it is. V'lachein Posak Rabbeinu Tam. So the word Rabbeinu Tam is the first word on the line, and it's about a third of the way down. V'lachein Posak Rabbeinu Tam, the Hilchazah Kahani Treilishni. We're mekel like both lashonis. Ve'ika chad minayu. If either condition applies, oy nechal chai, even if it's nechal al shulchan malachim, but it could be eaten raw, oy eino oila, or even if it cannot be eaten raw, but it's something that wouldn't be served al shulchan malachim, ein boy mishum bishulei oivdei kechav. There's no problem with bishul kechav, because the whole bishul kechav is only exer d'Rabbanan. The bishul soifrim halach achar mekel. Since it's only exer d'Rabbanan, we're mekel to say either side will be matter. And that's how we finish nowadays. Anything that could be eaten raw, or if it's not Eilah Shulchan Malachim. So potato chips can't be eaten raw, but they're not Eilah Shulchan Malachim. And apples could be eaten raw. So those are examples of things that would not have a problem of Shulchan Malachim. Gewaltig. And then Tosfos goes on and it says that everybody seems to agree with this. Let me see if I can find it. No, it's Rabbeinu Tam over here, but I thought he also says that other people are moida. No, it doesn't say over here. I must be mixing it up with something else. Gezok der Heilige Gemara weiter. Omar Rav Asi, Omar Rav. Dogim ketana maluk, small fish that are already salted. Herring would be a perfect example of this. It's already salted by Yid, and it's edible at that point. So since it's edible at that point, even if a guy now takes this herring and cooks it, ein bahen mishum bishul because it's already edible. If you take these fish raw and the guy cooks them, that's a problem of bishul akum. But if it was already salted and therefore it's already edible, now the cooking of the goy will not have an impact. Now, whether or not, what if the goy salts it and the goy makes it edible by salting it? Would that be a problem? That the Gemara is going to discuss later, and it's a machlokes. So, what does the Gemara say? Im tzalon oibet kechavim, soymech Yisrael aleya mishum erev tavshilim. If a goy took herring, which was already edible, salted, and then he roasted them, that's not a problem of bishul akum, and therefore soymech Yisrael aleya mishum erev tavshilim. You could even use that for an erev tavshilim. V'yavdinu oibet kechavim kasana harsana. But if the guy took this fish and made it into a dish called kasana harsana, that's cooked together with flour, then it's going to be also. Then it will be bishul akum because the flour needs to be cooked. Frank more pshita, it's pashut. The flour needs to be cooked, and therefore it's bishul akum. Not so pashut. Now the tema harsana iker, you would have thought that the fish is the most prominent part of this dish, and therefore we don't care about the flour, and it will not be bishul akum because the fish was edible before the guy cooked it. Kamash v'lo kimcha iker. A main part of this dish is the kemach, and that was not edible when it was raw, and therefore this would be considered bishul akum. Amar Avruna, Amarav. Oivek echavim shehitzis esa or ba'agam. What if you have somebody who wants to drain the swamp? So Trump comes along and he wants to drain the swamp. So what does he do? He didn't want to drain the swamp. We're talking about he wants to clear all the brush that's over the swamp to expose the water. So what he did is he lit all of the vegetation on fire. There was this massive fire over the swamp. And by the time the fire died down, there was no vegetation left. And now you could clearly see the body of water. So what if a guy did that? But there was such a raging fire, all of the chagovim, all of the grasshoppers in the swamp got crispy, got baked. Will there be a problem of bishul akum on those insects if you want to eat them? Kol chagovim sheba'agam asur. Rashi says, they weren't shechted. Zogt Rashi, a chagav is mutter to eat and it does not require shchita. Rashi says, chagav einoi ton shchita. So they're all usher to eat. So the question is, what is the isser? Why are they usher to eat? Hey chidami, there's a lot of insects in the swamp. And being that there was a fire, everything's burnt to a crisp, you can't really tell each insect what it was. Was it a min tahar or was it a min tameh? If that's the question, and that's why you're not allowed to eat any of them, who cares if it was the guy who burnt down the swamp? I feel Yisrael Nami, even if Yisrael burnt the swamp, if you can't identify the kosher species, surely you can't eat it. Ella, it must be that that's not the concern. You are able to identify the kosher species. It must be usher because the goy lit the fire and he cooked them all, and all these chagavim will be bishul oived kachavim. Zok the Gemara ki hai gavna mi usher. Would it be usher? It wouldn't be usher. V'omer of Chanam bar Ami Omer of Hoda Rav Hadas Omer of Yechanan hai oived kachavim the charish reisha, the charich reisha. What if the goy taka put the head of an animal on fire, but that's because he wanted to singe off the hair so that it would only be skin and meat. But in doing so, the ears, which get easily cooked, got fully cooked. Shari lemechel minei afilu meresh. You're allowed to eat even the ears that are fully cooked. It's bishul akum. Why is it allowed? Because the guy never intended to cook. The guy was trying to just get rid of the hairs. Alma lavure sarkamacham. You see, about the intention of the guy in lighting this fire was not to cook. It was rather just to get rid of the hair. That's not called bishul akum. So Hakanami, where he's trying to get rid of the vegetation in the swamp, all he's trying to do is drain the swamp, and that's not called cooking, and therefore there shouldn't be a problem with bishul akum. So we need to go back to the drawing board. Why are the chagavim aser? It's not bishul akum, and if it's because you can't identify what species it is, then why is it relevant that a goy lit the fire? If a yid lit the fire, it would be the same thing.
Yossi,
Yes,
Yossi,
yes, sure.
Yitzhak. I wanted to ask you.
We
So
missed
this
you on
ear
Shabbos.
is. Pardon? You missed me?
We missed you on Shabbos. But Shlomi
Okay,
found out a good job.
I'm sure he did. Okay, Mazel Tov in person,
Yeah, thank you.
almost in person. This ear of what animal is this?
It would have, if you're concerned, there's no shechita. An
Yes.
animal needs, oh, very good kasha. The Rishonim speak about that. So some Rishonim say maybe it was an animal that was geshechted, or it could be it was a kosher shechted animal that the guy did this singeing for.
So after it was shafted by a yid, the guy
Correct.
went and singed the ear.
Correct.
Uh-huh. Okay.
So Zok the Gemara, Alma Lavur Sarkam Chavin, Wachanami Ladluya Agabakam Chavin. That's where you're right. La'olam, the only reason why it's also has nothing to do with Bishul Akum, it's the Layoda High Tar High Tam. So your question will be: so what's the difference if a guy lit the fire, or if a Jew lit the fire? Any chanami makes no difference. So why does the Gemara introduce the story that it was a guy who lit the fire? Because that the story happened to the guy. It was a real story that occurred. There was a guy who lit it, and that's why we have this shiloh. And it's also because you cannot identify what's kosher and what's not kosher. So there's a Tosfos that I'd love to learn just because it's interesting and it's not for the faint of heart. So Tosfos says, I'm going towards the bottom of the Tosfos, towards the middle of the Tosfos, the high tom of the high tar. So Tosfos quotes a brisa. V'oy tanya b'tosefta. Oichel odom chagavim, you're allowed to eat grasshoppers, ben chayin ben mason. You could just put a live, creepy crawly right into your mouth. You don't have to worry. How are you allowed to eat a live insect? It's disgusting. Eating a live insect is baltashaksu. He was eating an insect, he was putting it into his mouth. You take it away or cook it. People shouldn't say, don't put it over your mouth, take it away from your mouth, because people are going to think you're eating it. So you see, eating a live insect is disgusting, it's baltashaksu. And for Tosfos, no, let me explain to you the scenario where it's not baltashaksu. And I'm going to ask the oilam over here if they think this is any better. What does it mean, a live insect? You take an insect, you pull off one leg, it's still moving. If you wash off that leg of your grasshopper, the leg about the shaksu boy saver. Now there's no about the shaksu. I don't know, but I guess in those days they must have had much stronger stomachs to eat these things. Gewaltig. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. The Gemara tells us that this is not called Bishul Akum because the intent of the guy who lit the fire was not to cook anything, to cook food. The intent of the guy to light the fire was just to clear the swamp. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead of myself. Let's see the Gemara weiter. So Zok the Gemara weiter. What happens if a Yid's making a barbecue? He throws the steak on the grill. It's sizzling geschmack.
Oh, sorry. I thought you did. You skip? We were up to Gufa, no?
Oh, I probably did skip. Thank you for pointing that out.
Gufa.
Most people let me get away with it, and then I skip a Gemara.
Right, that the last word on the line.
Gufa, Omar, and the Tziyonim changed the name to. Let me see if I can find it over here. Omar. Well, I don't see the Tziyonim, but they changed the name to Padas, I think. I don't see it on the side of that.
Hanan bar Ami Omer Rabbi Padas.
Oh, okay. Omer Rabbi Yechanan. Hi, Ovid Kechovim the Chorich Reisha. We're going back to the head of the animal that the guy wanted to get the feathers off or the hair off or whatever it is, and he singed it in the fire. Shari Lamechom and Afilim Reishu. Omer Rabbi Hilchach. Therefore, Once we know this halacha, that if the guy's intent is not to cook, it's to do something else. What happens if a guy had a steel peg and the guy wanted to forge it and strengthen it, and the way they would do it is they would heat it up very strongly in an oven. So he put this steel peg into a very strong oven. The Yid wanted to take advantage of that heat. So before the guy did this, the cover by Yisrael, kara made kara, and the Yid buried a vegetable there that needed cooking. Shaper dummy, the Yid is allowed to eat that vegetable. It was cooked from the guy making this fire for his peg. Pshita. Why should it be also? The guy's not cooking it. The guy wants to heat up and cook this metal. So maybe that's called an intent to cook, and therefore it should be considered Bishul Akum. The intent of the guy is just to forge and strengthen the steel. And that's not a kavanah to cook, and therefore this is not called Bishul Akum. Frek Toisvis, doing this, if you light a fire to forge the steel, it's called Bishul. There's an Isser Bishul. So Zok Toisvis, what classifies as Bishul for Hilchah Shabbos might have a completely different set of parameters from what classifies as Bishul, Legabi the Isser of Bishul Akum, which is all totally in Chazal assessing where there's a concern of Chasnus and where there isn't. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. Let's get back to the part that got me all exciting. You have a fresh, sizzling steak on the barbecue. Unless you're making a siyum, don't do this tomorrow. A big, fat, schmacker pizza steak. And you're going to see how I know that in a minute. You invited a guy for dinner, and he came and he said, "Ooh, look what's cooking!" And he took a fork and he flipped it over. Mutter, that will not be a problem of Bishul Akum. What exactly was the case?
No matter how much it was cooked already? No.
Well, we're going to get to that. If you're going to tell me even without flipping it, it would have cooked anyway. Pshita, the guy really, the act that the guy did was inconsequential. Elolava must be the it wouldn't have got cooked without the guy, and therefore the guy's flipping it was consequential. Am I mutter? So why would it be mutter? This is a classic case of Bishul Shalai the Kachavim Ninu. So it's more like Tricha. The loyafach have a bashal betardi shoy. If he wanted to flip the burger, it would have taken 2 hours to cook. By flipping it, it cooked faster. So Mao Detema Kruve Bishula Milsahi, making that it cook faster is considered consequential enough that Chazal would be Geyser at Bishul Akum. Kamash Malon. Let me ask you a question. Did you ever barbecue a steak and it took an hour even with flipping it? I never had such a steak. So this must have been a really fat, juicy geschmack steak. That's how I know it was a geschmack steak. I'm already salivating, and there's no meat for another week. So we'll have to hold on to the sugya. I wanted to say that the Lublin strikes again because we can have a barbecue tomorrow. But the Lublin is not striking again because we can't have a barbecue tomorrow. Zok the head of the Gemara weiter. Fragt the Gemara via Omer Abasi, Omer Rabbi Yochanan. Kol shu k'maichel ben Yosy. This touches on what Rav Moshe just asked. Kol shu k'maichel ben Yosy. If it's already cooked 1/3, which is the amount that it has to be cooked for a listim to eat it, so it barely passes the threshold of cooked. Ein by mishum bishul evit. If a guy now cooks this meat, it won't be bishul akum because we consider it already cooked. Ha einoi k'maichel ben Yosy. So if it wasn't cooked yet 1/3, yes by mishum bishul evit. There would be a problem with Bishul Akum. So it's fair, because in the case of the Gemara that we quoted earlier, when the guy flipped it over, it's mashma no matter when, it's going to be a problem. Even no matter when, it's not going to be a problem. Even if when the guy flipped it, it was not yet Kamach Ben Yosy. But here it says that if it was not yet Kamach Ben Yosy, there will be a problem of Bishul Akum. Zok the Gemara is a very big difference. Hatzom Kigoyin the Oisve Besilta. The meat that was not yet cooked, was not on the fire. It was in a basket. It would never have been cooked. The guy took that meat and put it on the grill. Yes, that's Bishul Akum. But in our case, it's on the grill already. The Yid put it on the grill. Whether or not the guy touched it, it would have been cooked anyway. Therefore, it's not Bishul Akum. So you see, there's nuances, and this is not a malacha you could learn on a YouTube video. Because to know when the Chazal is Goyzer, when Chazal is not Goyzer, you have to be Chazal to know that. We just have to accept the Gzeir for what it is. Zok Gemara Vater. Tani Nami Hochi. Meniach Yisrael Bosra Al Gabi Gecholim. A Yid allowed to put the meat on the grill, and then he could skip off. And then the guy could manage the grill. Imagine you're middle setting up the barbecue. Boy, there's davening mincha. I gotta run to mincha. Guys, do me a favor. Man the grill. I'm running off to daven mincha. You don't have to worry about Bishul Akum. The obvious kash is, why don't you have to worry about basar shenesalim and ayin? We'll get to that in a second. But where does a yid go? Where does a yid go when he's in the middle of roasting like a shemaka steak and he's got to run? Basic nesa besmedus. Let's look at the other case. While you're making the barbecue, your wife is preparing the corn and the salads for the barbecue. Maybe she's warming up the soup from yesterday, so she can put something on the pot, al gabekira, and she could leave. Uvos oivedis kechavim, and a goite can come. The goite can come umagisa and can stir it to hasten its cooking. Let's turn over on to Amud Beis. She says, you know what? We're getting prepared. The guests are coming. I'm going to go take a shower. I'll be basic Knesset. But the Tzionim changed basic Knesset to shuk. I got to go shopping. Oh, yeah, I forgot to buy ketchup. I got to go run in and buy ketchup. So there's no problem of Bishul Akum. What about Basar and Salman Ayin? What about maybe the guy put in something not kosher? So the Rishonim speak out that this is only true. This is only true if there's the pot is sealed or if the room is sealed, if there's supervision in such a way where we don't have to worry about the guy mixing anything in. But there's still a problem of Bishul. Zog to Gemara weiter. What if the goy put the meat on the grill? And the Yiddish flipped it over. We already said the flipping it over is non-consequential. So maybe it wouldn't solve the problem of Bishul Akum. Now, what's the halacha? Amar of Nachman Yitzchak, Kal v'chomer. When the guy flipped it and the guy caused the cooking to be completed, mutter, Gomer Biad Yisrael, if the Yid completed the cooking, like Kol Shekain, surely it should not be a problem of Bishul Akum. So basically, any little action that the Yid takes will solve the problem of Bishul Akum. Now, in our Gemara, we see it's not just any little action. He has to do something relatively consequential, flipping over the meat, it'll make it cook faster. But we know halacha l'maisa, we pass if the Yid just turns on the flame, that's good enough. That doesn't seem to be saying that in our Gemara, so we'll have to get there in a second.
Or better yet, Yosy, if the guy turns on the flame and the Yid comes and throws in some toothpicks to make the flame a little bit stronger, that's good enough also.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get that. That's what the Tosfos is going to talk about. That's correct. Either way, it's mutter. As long as the Jew did something. Now let's look at the top Tosfos, which discusses exactly what Rav Moshe just brought up. From this entire sugya, and I believe that I'm probably jumping ahead of myself because we didn't learn these words yet, but we're going to learn them soon. So we'll see Tosfos now. Mashma, from our sugya to mashma, not like what Moshe said. The Yid has to do something consequential, right? We're talking about Hafach. Moshe brought up that even if he did something like throw toothpicks into a fire, that would be also good enough. But where do you get that from? So Zok Tosfos, exactly what Moshe said, that just putting a toothpick into the oven when it's burning, even though it doesn't really cause anything to happen because it's already fully stocked with wood and the little splinter is not going to make a difference. There's actually a difference in halacha between the people from Bavel and the people in Eretz Yisrael. The Ka'amar b'nei Bavel, only the b'nei Bavel said mashlichin kiseim l'taner. But the people of Eretz Yisrael said that would definitely not be enough. It doesn't accomplish anything. So the Eretz Yisrael, the Yerushalmi would hold that that's not good enough. We follow the minig of the Bnei Bavel, so we all doing something very minimal will be enough of a hecker that there's no problem with Bishul Akum. But we know by Svardim that's not enough. If the Yid just lights the fire, that's not good enough. He has to get involved in the cooking. If you're getting a job as a mashgiach in an Ashkenazi restaurant, it's a much easier job than getting a job as a mashgiach in a Svardish restaurant. Because if you work in a Svardish restaurant as a mashgiach, you have to do a lot of the cooking because you need to do a lot more consequential stuff in order that it shouldn't be Bishul Akum. Zog the Heilige Gemara weiter. Amar Ravina. Hilchas od halach is Hayrivkta Yishaga Ovid Kechavim V'Afa Yisrael. If the guy made a flame and put it in the oven, but the Yid monitored the oven, Inami Yishaga Yisrael V'Afa Ovid Kechavim, Inami Yishaga Ovid Kechavim V'Afa Ovid Kechavim. The guy did everything. But V'Asa Yisrael V'Chata B'Chatuye. He lit up the fire. As Tosha says, it's something that's consequential, shaper dummy. And Tosha tells us, like Moshe spoke out, that even throwing a splinter, which is a lot less than Chata B'Chatuye, is also enough, according to the Bnei Bavli, to avoid the problem of Bishul Akum. How about Dag Meliach? A goy made herring. Are you allowed to eat herring that a goy made? He didn't cook it. It's mutter shari, because like we learned earlier, dafka if it's nishtana yidei eish, yidei or. Even though Meliach is Kareseach, maybe they didn't glazer. Rabbi Yochanan Aser, and Rabbi Yochanan held it was Aser. How about Beit Tluya? If a guy cooks a hard-boiled egg with the shell still on, so the guy can't touch the egg. He has no access to the egg. He only has the shell. Bakapara Shori holds no problem because the guy can't even get to the food. The food's covered by a shell. Rabbi Yochanan Aser, Rabbi Yochanan holds that's still Aser. Kiyaser Avdimi Omar Echad Dag Meliach Ve'echad Beit Tzot Saluya Chizkiah Ubar Kapara Shori. Chizkiah and Bar Kapara are mater. Rabbi Yochanan Aser, so it's 2 against 1.
See, don't we say that the reason is because anything that can be eaten raw, there's no isser of bishul by a goy?
Right. So what does this have to do with that? You don't need an egg raw. You don't need fish raw.
You could. Your fish is sushi. It's totally raw. And eggs, you can have people used to drink eggs raw for their throat.
So Vice the Chois from our Gemara, the Gemara didn't have sushi. And the Gemara held that maybe some people drink eggs. It wasn't called the normal way, right? Just because we see it happening, that doesn't mean that Chazal assessed that that's a normal way to eat, right? Technically, you can eat a raw potato, but that's not something that people do.
It's interesting because I asked the Rav once what bracha. We're talking about different brachas on cranberries. So Rav said to me. He says, well, nobody eats cranberries, so it's a shahakol. So I said, but nowadays, there's cranberries and everything. Your craisins, cranberries, this, that. He says, if the oilam eats cranberries, then it's ha'etz. If nobody eats it, it's shahakol.
So I guess
it depends on the time.
I asked the oilam today, whether or not something is oila al shulchan malachim should change from time to time, right?
Right.
Things change. I wonder if something is nechal chai, if that also changes from time to time. Like nowadays, like you said, fish is eaten raw like sushi. Right. So I wonder if now it's called nechal chai. I don't know. Then there's other questions like tuna fish, right? Tuna fish is a big shayla bishul akum, right? And pashas we pass on Israel shulchan malachim. I mean, there was a time where everybody ate starkish tuna, and Rabbi Loy said, no, you have to dafka get bishul Yisrael. You have to get some dogim. There was a shayla of dolphin proof because dolphins would get caught in the nets with the tuna. But the other issue is Bishul Akum. So, nowadays it's very easily to get Bishul Yisrael tuna fish. But tuna fish, I know high grade tuna is sushi. The stuff that they put in cans is probably not as high grade. Maybe that's not royu to be eaten raw. But these are all shilas for Rabbanim. So these are all good horrors. So let's see the Gemara weiter. So what happened is someone came, he came to the Reish Galusa. Now the Reish Galusa to us seems like, a holy place. Not all Reish Galusas behave properly. Some of them were pretty corrupt. And Amrulay, they asked him, Beitzot sluya mai. Am I allowed to eat a egg that was roasted by a goy? Amalahu. So Rab Chia Parva told the Reish Kalusa, Chizkia ubar kapara shari. Chizkia and bar kapara said it's mutter. Rabbi Yechon Nasser. And the in Devar Shalachad b'Makom Mishnayim. And I'm Makel because Rabbi Yochanan is one, Chizki and Bakabar are two. It's two against one. I'm Makel. Omul Rabbi Zvid piped in. He was also, I guess, in the court of the Resh Chalusa. He said, "Loy Tzisule, don't listen to Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia is wrong." Hachi Amar Abaye. Abaye said, "Hil Chazuk Chaval said Rabbi Yochanan," which means you're not allowed to eat those eggs. You're not allowed to eat dag maliach. Now the Resh Chalusa was not very happy with that psak, so they wanted to kill Rabbi Zvid because of it. Ashkuye Neguta the Challah, they gave him some type of vinegar, but nach nafshe, and he died. So of course the Mefarshim asked, just because they wanted to eat something that he didn't let them, they're going to kill him? And what happens with vinegar? So the Mefarshim speak out that could be nach nafshe doesn't mean kill. Could be means the vinegar calmed him down. He shouldn't be such a kanoi, so that he should be more nicha. But the shaila is a good one. But you see that these Reish Galusas weren't so squeaky clean. Tadarabon. HaKafrisin. Kafrisin Rashi teaches as it's the peel of some type of fruit that it was able to be eaten raw, but people cooked it. Kaplutois, Rashi says, kaplutois is crazy. That's cress. Again, it could be eaten raw. And then we have Vaha Mitalia, which the Gemara is going to talk about soon what it is. Vachamin and water. Water, even though it's cooked by a goy, it's nechal chai. It doesn't change. Vakloyos shalahen, and kloyos, which are roasted kernels of wheat or barley that are sweet. Shalahen of goyim, mutarim, all these are not a problem of Bishul Akum. But beyatzluya, a roasted egg, asura, that's asur. They pass in the course of Rabbi Yochanan. Shemen, what about oil? Rabbi Yudah Nasu, Veizdinoi, Nimnulov, Vehitiru, they were matter the oil of a goy. Tanya.
Yossi, what about water that's not potable, and only by cooking it does it become potable? Would that be considered Bishul Akum?
I don't think so because the water itself is always drinkable. The problem is the impurities that are in it. So it's not really cooking. What you're cooking is to get rid of the impurities. So you might be killing the bacteria, but the water was not nishtana.
Okay.
Rashi doesn't say that the reason why chamin is mutter is because you could drink it raw. Rashi says because it was not nishtana. If you look at Rashi inside, the chamin, maim chamin, the ein mishtanin mibrios or. So it's not because of nechal chai, it's because it's still the same water. Yeah, you might have burnt off some not healthy things in it, but chamin is the same water cold as it is hot. It's H2O. Okay, Zok Gemara weiter. Tanya, we learned for everyone who wants to know what metalia is, he amtalia, he fishalia. Now, just in case you might not know what fishalia is, he siyasa. Now, what if you don't know what siyasa is? My siyasa. Amar Rabba Barbachana, Rabbi Yochanan, ha'arbin shenin, the nafik hay uvda mitzrayim. 40 years ago, the ingredients and the process of how to make metalia was retrieved from Mitzrayim. Rabbi Barbachana Didei Amar, and he said in his own name, not in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Hashisenstein, 60 years ago, the Nafik Hayov Yomi Mitzrayim. It's not a machloikis if it was 60 years ago or 40 years ago. Rabbi Yochanan said what he said 40 years after it came out of Mitzrayim. Rabbi Barbachana, 20 years later, said that it happened 60 years ago. Rabbi Barbachana Didei Amar. So I'm sorry. Each one's talking about the guy by his age group. So how do you make it? What is this recipe that came out of a tribe? Maisu bizar de karpasa. You take the seed of karpas. Karpas, I think the article touches as cress. Does anybody have an article Gemara?
Yes, press.
Cress. So to me, karpas is either a potato or romaine lettuce or a banana or celery. But I guess it's cress. Ubizra the kisna, and the seed of flax. Ubizra the shavlisa, which Rashi teaches as fegrami or something. Let me look at Rashi. Rashi calls it fenugreek. It's some type of spice. And and you take all these 3 seeds and you put them, you soak them all together in tepid water. Ad the mekabel. Let them sit in the water until they start to sprout. Then after they sprout, you take a brand new little jug, you fill up this jug with water, v'tarbu gargishta. You take a clod of earth called a gargishta, it's a type of earth, and you soak it in this new jug, and then you take the clod of earth out, umedapkin bay, and you take these 3 seeds that have began to sprout, and you put it on this earth, and bring it into a bathhouse. Adenafku, when you walk out of the bathhouse, it's going to be magical. Melavlavi, they're going to blow up and become huge plants in a matter of moments just by taking this concoction into a bathhouse. And this is what we're talking about, that if a goy cooks it, it's not going to be a problem. So, Zok to Gemara, what do you do with this? If you eat this plant, it'll cool you off. It's like an internal air conditioner. The carry, it'll cool you off. From the hair on the top of your head until the bottom of your feet. So who needs to spend big money on air conditioning? You could just use this internal cooling method. But Baruch Hashem, Rabashi came to my rescue. Amar Rabashi, Amli Rab Chanina, Milin. This is all old wives' tales. It's nonsense. It doesn't work. Those say this only works like the kishuv. But Avoda, this doesn't work. So if you want relief from the heat, you can always call me. Tanarabban. Hakusvan shall Kusvan was they would take, after they made beer with dates, the shmorim, the leftover piece of dates were there at the bottom. They would take that and they would cook it in water. And the question is, are you allowed to eat it? If they're cooked in a big pot, also they're going to be aser. But Yerktan in a small pot, they're going to be mutter. Now, we're now changing subjects because there's no problem of Bishul Akum here. Here the question is that it's Baileya Tarfis from the walls of the Keli. So if it's in a big Keli, we're afraid it will be Baileya Tarfis. But if it's in a small pot, then we're not worried that it'll be Baileya Tarfis. Veizehu Yerktan, what qualifies as a small pot where we're not worried that the small pot has any tarvis in it? If the smallest little bird, which is the smallest item that's treif, that a goy might cook in there, if that can't fit into the opening of the pot, that means that there's no way you cooked anything non-kosher in the pot. I guess they weren't worried about cooking camel milk or some other tarvis. They only cooked these types of items, and since it cannot contain, this pot is too small, or the spout of the pot is too small to get the steeper drawer in, we can assume that nothing that wasn't kosher was ever cooked in this pot. Who said they put that treif of bird into it whole? Maybe they chopped it up into small pieces and they cooked it in that pot, and now this little pot is going to be usher. So if you cook these dates in them, it's going to be a leia tamisr. Elo kol she'ein roish tzipur drawer yochel lekos b'soich. The hole has to be so tiny that even the head of a tzipur drawer couldn't get inside. Meaning, even if you chopped it up into small pieces, even those small pieces wouldn't get into that jug. Then you can be sure that if you cooked that pot, you didn't cook any isser in that pot. Frank the Gemara, you're telling me a big pot, you're concerned about blias of isser. Vatanya echad yoyer gedoyla, ve'echad yoyer katana is mutter, and you're not worried about blias. Zok Gemara, loy kasha, ha command omer noisen dam of gam osir. We paskin that if the taste that goes in from the keli into the food that you're cooking, if it's noisen dam of gam, then it doesn't necessarily mean that it's so disgusting that you can't eat it. It means it doesn't put a good taste in, even though you can't really sense it. Osir, it will asser the keli it'll asser the food that you cook anyway. And therefore, in a big pot, you have to be worried about blias asuris. But ha command amar nois and tam of gam mutter. The brisa that says it's always mutter holds nois and tam of gam as mutter, and therefore, no matter what you cook in this goyish pot, whatever blias come out of the goyish pot are pogum, and therefore it's mutter. So the obvious question is, we know that when do the blias inside the keli become pogum? That's only if 24 hours have elapsed since you cooked treifus in that pot. If it's ein ben yoimai, but if it's ben yoimai, it would be usher. So how could this Gemara assume that it's nice and tam of gam? What if the guy just cooked in this pot right before he cooked the dates? He might have cooked tarfus. So Zok Tosh was a very, very important answer. Even Shem Gilav the Chavam noise tam of gam is mutter. Mashma the Haki Hilchasa. It's mashma that's how we pass him. The Gam Rabbi Yehuda Nasi Hitter Hashemen Bafilu B'Shavu Basil Shagozrolov Haki Svir Look the Price for the ill. Everybody holds that noise and tam Livgam is mutter. And now I'm going to skip a little bit to the lower end of the Tosfos, about 2/3 of the way down. The center word in the line is the kaimalon. The kaimalon nami distam kalei oivdek echavim enyon b'nayoyim. You can always assume a standard pot of the goy was not used that day. Midisharinon mishcha shalika. We allow oil that was cooked by a goy to be eaten. The shemen v'chiltus nami shari. Even shemen and chiltus would have been mutter if not for the fact the churfei machlile. All things that are 24 hours old, all beliefs that are 24 hours old are nois dam of gam, unless we're dealing with sharp things like an onion, and that will wake up the pogum de katam and make it good. But besides dover charif, we can always assume that any pot that a guy has, you didn't cook in it that day, and this doctosis is agreed by everybody. Rashi, Tam, Vari, the Stam Kalayam Einan B'Nayoimon. You can always assume that a goy's keli wasn't used that day. Behind the timer, you know why we can assume that? Lefi shows svek sveka. Anytime a goy cooks something in his pot, it's a svek sveka. First of all, sofek nishtam shuboy ayoim ayesma. We don't know if he used it today or yesterday. So there's one side to say it's nice and tam of gam because maybe he used it yesterday. And even if you know they're going to use it today, even bad. If anybody has a goyish tenant, sometimes what they cook in there stinks so bad because they stink there in the fin, right? So it could be the food that they cooked in the pot, even if it was ben yoyim, it was disgusting food, and it would anyway be poigim. And even if it was good food, maybe they cooked it yesterday and not today, or maybe they cooked something that doesn't have any taste at all. And therefore, we can always assume that a pot that you have, that a goy cooked in, was Einoi ben Yoimoi. Gewaltig. Sagt der Heilige Gemara weiter. Omer Absheshes. High Mishcha Shlika. Cooked oil, Dar Moyach a goy, Osir, it's going to be Osir. Omer Absafar, why should it be Osir? L'may nechashla. Imishum Yaruve, if you're afraid that the guy mixed some wine into the oil, sorry, it would mess up the taste. A guy would never do that. Imishum Bishul, if you order Bishul Akum, Nechalu Kamay Shulchai, oil can be eaten raw. And Imishum Gi'ulu, and if you're worried that it's going to have a taste of the tarfus that the pot had in it, nois and tam of gamu umutter. So that was the raya that Tosus brought, that anything that a guy cooks, we assume it's nice and tam of gam. Boy minim rabasi, hani ahini shliki deramoy. Ahini rashes are tomorrow, cooked dates, which you can eat raw. My watalacha. If there are dates that are sweet that you can eat raw, the vadai shari, they're vadai mutter because you can eat them raw. Miriri, if they're very, very bitter, that they cannot be eaten unless they're cooked, like people lach the vadai asiri, they're for sure also. Hidi boilach, the shaila that we have is mitziyoi, if they could be eaten, but only if you're it's ideat chak. So is that called bishul akum if they're cooked? My amalu, my tiboilach. I don't know what the shaila is. The Rebbe asar, the Rebbe assered it. Umani Levi assered it. If you normally don't eat it, it's only nechal ideat chak. That is something that would have a problem with bishul akum. Shtisa. Shtisa is a drink of some sort that you make by either taking kloyos, roasted kernels of wheat or barley, or even of adoshim, legumes. You grind them up and you either mix it into water or into vinegar. So Rav holds you're allowed to use that from a goy. We don't have a concern of any problem. But Avoda Shmuel v'Levi Asri, they ask. So Bechidi v'Sari, if they made this shtisa out of wheat or barley, Kula Amalai Pligi Dishari. Everybody holds it's no problem because they just mix it with water. There's no cooking involved. But betalfachi, the challah, if they made it out of adoshim, which has a very bad taste, so they have to cook it in vinegar. So then there's a problem. There it's also because you couldn't have eaten it without cooking, and they cook it in vinegar, which would be Bishul. Keep ligi, you know where there's a machlokes between Avoda, Shmuel, and Levi versus Rav? Betal chavi demaya. It's adoshim that aren't so bad, and you're able to just dissolve them in water. You're able to do it in water. You don't have to cook it. Ma'asav, our guys reading how to walk. Where guys are these type of adoshim, she saw made out of these type of adoshim that doesn't need cooking, or to other adoshim that would need cooking. Ma'asav, our guys reading vikadami lechumra betalfi demaya kula amal pligi daser. If you're for sure guys are once some adoshim are also, they're all also in the machal of shtisa. Keep ligi, the whole machlokes is bechiti v'sari. Maybe you would even ask a chiti v'sari atu adoshim. Mars over Gazrin and Ha to Ha, Mars over Loy Gazrin. Rav. So Rav says, all Shtisah is mutter. Now I'm going to prove it to you. You know, there's a famous line that Rabbanim speak. And they always say that people always say, I can eat this, everybody eats it. And the Rav always says, everybody eats it, that's not a heter. There's no such heter called everybody eats it. Right? And we've all heard Rabbanim scream against people who say, what do you mean everybody eats it? But I think there's a very strong makar to that hechsher of everybody eats it in our Gemara today. So let's look at what happened over here. So we have a question of if this tisah from a goy you could take it or not. So Zok the Gemara Amarav Trey Minish Tisai Shadar Barzilai Hageladi LaDavid. Barzilai Hageladi was a goy, and when David was running away from Avshalom, Barzilai Hageladi was kind enough to send David a whole bunch of provisions, and amongst them we're going to see in the pasuk he sent him two types of shtisah. And David ate them both. So you see clearly there's no problem with shtisah. Techsiv mishkav v'sapois uklayoytzer chitin usa'arim v'kemach v'koli number 1 upul v'adoshin v'koli number 2. These two kolis, Zoktaracha, are referring to the two types of shtisah that was sent from the goy Barzilai Galadi to David. That's number 1. The number 2 why it has to be mutter is v'hashta huda kamafki tzani l'shuki de nardo. There's so many merchants, goyish merchants, who sell this in the shuki of nardo, and everybody buys them. V'las techayish l'had Avoda Shmuel v'Levi, and no one is chayshish to the chumrah of Avoda Shmuel and Levi. Everybody eats the shtisah of chitim and sayrim. So here you have the first occurrence, recorded occurrence of the heter, the hechsher of yeder estes, make when it's estes. That's what we have in our Gemara. Don't
Yosy,
try. Yes.
Yosy, but that why is that a riot from Barzilai? This is shots. He was starving. He had no food. You could eat anything then.
Yeah, but he gave him other things too. He gave him chitim and sayrim. He didn't have to eat the koli. He had chitim, he had sayrim, he had kemach. He had pul v'adoshim. The koli means the shtisah. But good question. Somebody asked that today as well. Zok the Gemara weiter. Omar Chizkiah, loy shanu ela shedarkam. The only time we say that it's mutter if it's, I'm sorry, I skipped the Dibra Maschel. Ukvesion, soaked foods are also to take from a goy, not because there's anything wrong with soaked, it's not bishul, but shedarkam loses b'seichin yayin. Often in soaked vegetables, the goyim put wine into it, so there's a problem of yayin stam, which is osir bana. So Amar Chizkiah loy shanu ela shedarkam. If it's likely that they did it, but we don't know for sure they did it, then and only then does our Mishnah say that it's osir b'achila, but not osir bana. Aval b'yadua, if you know for a fact that the goy mixed into these soaked vegetables from wine, osir afilu b'hana, it'll be osir even b'hana, like stam yayin. Frag the Gemara, umaysh nomi murais, the shor rabbanan b'hana. Murais, where we know for sure the goy put wine into it, it's osher b'achila, but it's still mutter b'ana. So the Gemara, because hasam la'avurei zuama. There, the only reason why they put wine into the murais is because the fish has a very bad taste, and the wine is just there to neutralize the zuma. I don't know if you remember, we learned that the wine gets like eaten up in the murais, so it's not even bad anymore, and it's just there to get rid of that bad taste. Hacha lemtuke taima. Here, when they put the wine into the vegetables, into the soaking vegetables, it's actually adding taste to it, and therefore biyadua is also afilu ba'ana, but by murais even biyadua is only also ba'chi. Even if you know for sure that he poured wine into the soaking vegetables, it's still going to be mutter bahano. The Chachamim in our Mishnah holds murais is mutter bano, but Reb Meir was also bano. Yet you're saying, according to everybody, even according to Reb Meir, the soaked vegetables will be mutter bahano. If even if you know for sure that there's wine mixed into it, why should that be better than murais? Zok to Gemara, let's turn on to Daf Lamed Tes Amid Aleph. Hasam Yediyim Amosha. By the murais, the reason why it's worse, according to Reb Meir, is because when you're dipping the bread into the murais, you know there's wine there, and you're sopping up the wine too, and you're eating the wine, and therefore Reb Meir holds that that's also bana. But hacha lo yadim amashim. Here, you're never drinking that wine. You're taking the vegetables out of the solution. The solution isn't there for taste. Reb Meir would hold the solution is there primarily to preserve the vegetable, and therefore we don't consider it like it's mamish absorb the wine, and therefore, although it is also b'achila, it will not be also b'ana. So Baruch Hashem, we were zoichet to finish Aflamat Ches, and tomorrow we're going to do Aflamat Tes. Now, for the next couple of days, I'm going to be pushing ahead because just in case Mashiach doesn't come, we're not going to be able to learn on Sunday because it's Tisha B'av next Sunday. So I want to this week get ahead enough that we would have incorporated Sunday's daf so that on Monday we'll be on time. And if
Yosy,
Halavai Mashiach comes and we could learn on Sunday, we'll be a lot ahead.
Yosy, what are we going to learn on Shabbos? There's going to be two different minchas. What are we going to do Shabbos?
There's 2 minchas on Shabbos.
Yeah, because people will go home and eat shalshud. It'll be at
Everybody goes
2:30
home to
and
eat Shalashudas. Everybody's
I
going to
know,
go
but
home to eat
say
Shalashudas.
there's one mincha at 2:30 and there's another mincha at 6, I think.
I will probably learn before the 6 o'clock mincha. Most people are going to have mincha at 6, I assume.